Hello, travelers. This is a trigger warning that this episode contains discussion of attempted suicide and a suicide. If you or someone you know needs help, you can dial 988 from any cell phone, and that is a suicide prevention and help hotline. Please seek help because there is someone out there who cares.
I'm author Mark Muncy.
And I'm author Erika Lance.
And this is Eerie Travels. Greetings, travelers.
Greetings, travelers.
Ooh, that was a little scary.
Yeah, well, today is a spooky episode.
It kind of is, yeah. That we were, we're taking a little detour on our road to Mothman. So
road to Mothman.
But we kind of thought we had to get this one out of the way because it's been nibbling at us for a little while. So
well, that and we've done so much traveling. This is a little one we're throwing in between all of our traveling. We got a couple more traveling episodes coming up. I think the next 3 are actually traveling episodes because of all the stuff we're doing. So roads to everywhere. But we have breaking news, actually.
We do.
Yes. So I have breaking news. Mine is less fun, but kind of goes along with the theme of the day. And then,
yes.
So I'm going to actually let you go first with your breaking news.
I'll say because we both have breaking news, which is great. So this one comes from our good friends at Paranormality Magazine. And they have one of the creatures or one of the legends in my new book comes from South Carolina and our neighboring state. And Pawleys Island has long had this ghostly legend, and we joked about it before, where the town kind of embraces it, of the enigmatic gray man. And the headline is "Mysterious Figure Spotted on Pawleys Island Sparks Speculation About the Gray Man." Imagine that. And so the Gray Man ghost goes all the way back to 1822, and he appears just before impending hurricanes. And major storms like Hurricane Hazel 1954, Hurricane Hugo 1989, Hurricane Florence in 2018. And then this week, someone took a photograph out there and got a hazy figure. And you can see this report. We'll put the links in the show notes. But if you go to paranormalitymagazine.com, you can see the story and you can read all about it. And this one actually made ABC News. So wow, pretty epic. And you can see that photo there. And if you do order a subscription while you're there, use the code TRAVELS, get yourself 10% off.
Wow.
What's your story?
So mine is not as pleasant. And this actually broke a few days ago, but there is an escaped killer by the name of Danilo Cavalcanti, I think is how his name is spelled. So he literally in Chester County Prison walked out of the jail. Yeah,
in September, Labor Day weekend. Yeah.
Yep, just walked out.
Yep.
And so the problem is this is he's got a long story. I put a link to the whole thing in the show notes, but and there's also been photos of him on trail cameras and stuff like that. So yay, technology. But he literally he's a vicious killer. Vicious. He's not even convicted of all the crimes they think he's guilty of.
Right.
But he literally walked out of the prison.
He's already been sentenced, to life. He's never getting out. So what was to stop him?
Yeah, and there was nothing to lose. So we're on day 7. They've actually closed the schools and stuff up in that area. Yeah. The link I'm sharing is from the Philadelphia Inquirer because of how dangerous they think he is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, nothing to lose. So again, yeah, check out the link. And we're not sure by the time this airs if he will have been captured yet or not. One would
Fingers
hope.
crossed.
One would hope, but manhunt sometimes can take a long time, as the news has shown us many a time. So definitely stay safe out there, gang. Stay safe out there.
Yes, stay safe. But today's episode, we're going to talk about something that, I'm a big fan of true crime, not of crimes happening,
No,
but it's one of the things that interests me. And
the
there are a couple,
the speculations and all that. Yeah.
But there are a couple of cases, and we're not going to cover all of them with this, but there are a couple of cases me and you've talked about a lot, which is where the boogeyman is actually real.
Yeah, or as real as he can be. Yeah. And that's what this may, the guy walking out of prison, this could easily turn into a folktale, 10 years down the line, or even less, at the rate folklore generates nowadays. I want to talk about one that kind of came to rise way back in the 60s, but was made famous and by a film that came about. And the film was, what was it? It was in 2008.
Yes.
Right?
But we should clarify for everybody, what is a boogeyman?
All right. Yeah. So let's start there. So a boogeyman is, it goes to the term booger. It goes to the term bogey, which are old Irish, Gaelic, Scottish, terms for a hunt or a fae or, some sort of creature that will get you. And
it's used generally to scare children into behaving well.
Right. Eat your greens, or the boogeyman will get you. Don't get up at night. Don't get out of bed once we put you to bed, because the boogeyman will get you. Don't go into that old haunted house because the booger lives there. That sort of thing. So, and that's and these were things to keep you safe, right? This was, somebody went in there and got hurt. So now we tell you this story so you don't do it yourself, And a lot of times these were based on somebody got hurt or somebody got murdered, so.
Exactly.
Or worse, which is hard to say, because that was always one of my favorite things in the Batman 66. Somebody said, but Batman, we could have been killed. And he looks at Robin and goes, or worse.
No, exactly. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the boogeyman, right? And your boogeyman, because you introduced me to this boogeyman, and your boogeyman's name is
Cropsey.
Cropsey
from Staten Island. And he is the classic hook man horror. You go and it was originally told in Boy Scout camps in the area. And he was you go park or go near there as a teenager. There's always some teenagers went there, or some Boy Scouts got too close to the Willowbrook School, which was this old, they call it the Willowbrook School, but it was actually a hospital for kids with developmental deficiencies, Down syndrome, other things like that. But the story was always, that guy with the hook was coming to get you. He lives in the woods. And then there was always there's always some version of it where, he killed his family in some grisly fashion, was put away at one of the nearby, mental hospitals, and he escaped. And they all talk about, Willowbrook's a mental hospital. Well, kind of not. But, if you've got you're running a Boy Scout camp next to that, you work with what you have when you're telling your story. And this guy was Cropsey, and he would come and he would grab you with one hand while he's trying to grab your car with the other and stuff like that. It was and then you would drive away and there would be the hook hanging on the side of the door. And then it was he lived in the tunnels under the school, because the Willowbrook School had been abandoned for generations. And and anybody who moves to Staten Island. Now, Staten Island was kind of the forgotten island in New York. It's the forgotten borough, right? It's the suburb that it was pretty swampy. It was pretty terrible. This is where the mob hid a lot of bodies. Literally, they still don't know how many are buried there. And you would drive down Route 22 and you pass another hospital there called the Wingate, and that was it was run by the New York Department of Mental Hygiene, and that was he'd be in your rearview mirror, he'd be there, and there was one story where he killed gas attendants, and he would don their uniforms so he'd pump your gas and then attack you. So that's like why suddenly self-pump became a thing there before anywhere else. So Staten Island had the New York Farm Colony, which is where people who were, it was what we would call a poor farm back in the day. Not pleasant names to these places. Warning now, folks, these are bad terms and they're dated. The Seaview Hospital, which was a tuberculosis ward, and that was also right near Willowbrook. So there's literally acres and acres and acres of these crumbling old hospitals right around a Boy Scout camp. So
yeah,
that's where these things come. And then of course our wonderful friend the 80s and the Satanic Panic comes around, and it's all right there because Willowbrook was where the devil worshippers had black masses and had makeshift altars in the ruins and all that. So
yeah, one of the things we should, and there's a documentary, we're going to link it in there on Cropsey, but I think one of the things that makes this story really terrible is, you had these terrible things that happened that, propagated this story, and like the mental health hospital and things like that, where all the funding went away from the mental health hospital, but there were more patients. I mean, at one point you said, what is it supposed to have, like 2,000 patients, and ended up with 10,000 or 10, something?
Yeah. And in 1972, there was a doctor who worked at Willowbrook, and he was so upset about the conditions that he slips a key to a young reporter named Geraldo Rivera and says, you got to film this. And so Geraldo sneaks in and films what he sees there and shows it to the world. And it's, patients living in filth, and they're just children, half of them are naked. And there's, literally is, no staff hardly at all because the budget's gone. And most of them are just untrained folks trying to help, or worse, taking advantage of the people that are there because, they weren't really doing diligent background checks, back then.
People just get dumped there.
Yep. And
that
then,
was the thing.
Like I said, the employees, some of them were terrible, and that's where Cropsey shows up, right? The real Cropsey. And this is, like I said, the subject of that documentary, and from 2008. And the school's been around since the 1930s, and there was a guy there who was, what was he hired as? He was hired as a custodian.
Yes.
And he had taken the name of Andrew Rand, which, or Andre Rand. Sorry, Andrew Rand's from BioShock. Andre Rand. And that wasn't even his real name, but there was no checking back of it, right? This is back then. This is the 70s. His real name was Frank Rashan, and he was already had been convicted of a couple crimes, and somehow he's able to hide all this and gets there as a custodian. And then he does some terrible things, or does he? That's the point of the documentary, is it kind of looks like he fits the bill. He's done all the things, but the evidence is very thin. There is no physical evidence, but they do start finding bodies. But then they realize there's all these kids disappearing in the area, like lots and lots of children have disappeared over the years, and they all tie it in to this one guy. And The first was a 5-year-old girl named Alice Pereira, and that was in July of 1972. She literally just vanishes into thin air playing in her neighborhood, which is right near Willowbrook. And Rand had already served months in prison for abducting children.
Yeah.
And he's out. And he was never convicted for kidnapping or abduction because none of the kids were harmed for that. But he did serve time for unlawful imprisonment. That was why he only did 10 months.
Yeah.
But then while he was free, she goes missing. And so they consider him a prime suspect, but there was never evidence. And the girl's never seen again. And it isn't until 1981, Holly Ann Hughes goes missing. And her parents file a missing persons report. And several people said they saw her with Rand right before her disappearance.
Yeah.
Again, though, no evidence, no arrest, just a few witness reports. 2 more years pass, and he's the primary suspect again when a little 11-year-old girl named Tia Jackson disappears. And then, and then in 1984, a 21-year-old named Hank Gaforio vanishes. And he had the mental state of a 9-year-old. And since nobody's being apprehended, everybody's panicking now. It's, this is crazy. And it's not till 3 years after that they finally get the break. And a young girl named Jennifer Schweiger, 12 years old, with Down syndrome. She's reported missing July 9th, 87. And they search for her. And 35 days after her missing is when they finally found her body.
Yeah. And one of the things I think it's important to state sort of here and as part of this, right, is that we're talking about people who they didn't look into a lot of these crimes, really, right? That wasn't a thing they were doing. They didn't look into them. So they didn't even like the last crime was the one that any attention, because their parents really started screaming.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it finally got attention, and it brought attention to these older cases. And
exactly.
They start putting 2 and 2 together. And
exactly.
it's literally was one of the volunteers that was, and it was the police had already searched this area 100 times. And then suddenly they find the foot. And one of the volunteers, he said it was something that stuck with him the rest of his life, that, he found that foot. And now Rand had already been arrested because before the corpse was discovered, because he was caught lying to reporters about having never met the girl, but he had already made statements to the police, and other people had made statements to the police, and suddenly he heard about all these individual accusations, so he had to change his entire story for his defense. And that's what actually got him into trouble.
And one of the things when he got arrested, right, because there's a lot touched on, that's why we had a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode. There was a lot touched on regarding people who had potentially disabilities, things like that, because all of this was around the fact that there really wasn't care for people like this. And then when he got arrested, the mug shot of him looked like they had arrested somebody with disabilities and stuff.
Yeah,
like they just
so
randomly chosen somebody.
Yeah, he was in some catatonic state, and it looked like, this guy's a convenient drifter. He used to work at the insane asylum and all this. And that's, the documentaries kind of goes into that, where they're trying to talk to him, because it's that they are filming this during his trial, because now he got arrested for kidnapping in 1988, but the jury did not convict him of murder. They could not prove that
because they didn't have a body.
Well, they had the body on her. but they still couldn't convict of murder. So
Oh, if I recall correctly, part of it was because they had no evidence linking him to the murder.
no evidence linking him to the body. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just a couple witnesses had seen him with her. So, witness statements, not, concrete evidence a lot of the time, but in this case, it was enough. And he went away. And so, there's no statute of limitations for kidnapping. There are statutes of limitations for other things. So that's why they were able to charge him again 20 years later for one of the previous ones, where they finally were able to put 2 and 2 together and put him at the scene, because one of the witnesses finally came forward and said, oh yeah, I did. He tried to lure us in with candy. And it was a little girl then, but now she's all grown up. And that was one of the ones that the movie, the documentary really focuses on, is because all we're relying on is the word of this one kid who's now grown up, and she said he was wearing a mask. Well, how do you know it was him? And the defense was like, this is bogus. They just don't want him out because he was due for parole from that original one, again, where they couldn't convict him of murder. And so he was given an additional 25 years. So now they're all like, well, Staten Island Boogeyman is in jail, right? So
Yeah.
And now what's weird about this is he started writing, and he would write letter, people would ask to interview him, and people still do. He's still in jail. He is still alive. And people are trying, he is up for parole again in 2037. If he lives that long, he'll be 93. But he sent letters, directed, usually on Mother's Day, written to all the ladies on Staten Island who supported prosecutorial vindictiveness against this innocent person. And then and one of his quotes is, should I become a millionaire, it would be my true nature to grant all of you with each an envelope full of seeds to plant and cultivate a rose bush that produces roses every season as a token of my heartfelt forgiveness, rather than bouquets of rosebuds which blossom and shortly die out. So that's pretty crazy, right?
It's so crazy.
Yeah. And then he would say, yeah, come interview me. And then when you get there, he's like, oh, changed my mind. Don't want to talk to you. And here's my manifesto.
And that is the thing, is that there's a degree of warped thinking, with this human, but he seems very highly intelligent about his methodology. And when you watch the documentary, you definitely go into the background of this particular creeper, right?
Oh, yeah.
And his grifter status and all of that. And this was, I feel like, having researched and watched the documentary and everything like that, this was another one of those cases where the victims were ignored. Not enough was done caring about the victims to even get it started to do a correct way to find this boogeyman, who in the night was going and finding children, right, with disabilities or other abilities, one could say, right, that were unable to care for themselves. And what's scariest is the reason he was doing this.
Oh yeah, it seems like, now we're still not sure. He hasn't said a word about any of this. He's never.
But he does talk about it a little bit in some of the letters he's written. Yeah. And he talked about it, I forget with who, but there was another time he talked about that if somebody was doing this, it was because these children were not being cared for.
Right. Yeah. That since Willowbrook had closed and there was nowhere to take care of these kids, nowhere to put them away, he was saving them from a worse life, ahead of them and all this, or someone would have been saving them from worse life. He was very careful in his wording. And then the one lady who's the volunteer from the documentary, she's still around. Donna Cutugno, I believe is her name. She calls him the Hannibal Lecter of Staten Island. And she still leads that Friends of Jennifer group for missing children. And they are a bunch of volunteers that still search Willowbrook's, 300 plus acres twice a year, because they're still looking for the other bodies.
Yeah.
And they really, really, really want to do this. And they talk about how he's still haunting them to this day. And, did he do all this? It seems like he's definitely capable of doing it. They've tied him so much. He lived in the apartment complex where the original girl disappeared and all this stuff. And then once he was put in behind bars, it stopped.
Yes.
So, maybe the killer moved on. Maybe they thought they got too close. There's a lot of maybes in this case, but it seems like, honestly, it looks like they caught the boogeyman. But if you go to that area, well, the filmmakers were actually filming on the Willowbrook ruins, and they were filming things. They found homeless people living in the tunnels. They found elements of a cult that, are on Staten Island. And they did find kids sneaking into the grounds because they'd heard the stories of Cropsey, and they didn't even know Andre Rand. Sorry.
Yeah. They don't know the story of the real man behind Cropsey.
Yeah. Somebody needs to come through the podcast wires and slap me every time I say Andrew. It's because I've got a big BioShock display over to the left.
I think we don't need to do any slapping, but Cropsey is definitely watch the documentary. It's riveting, but it's one of those things where you go, can we not repeat this? Can we not repeat ignoring of the victims, regardless of who the victims are, to bring them justice? Because that's what that group that still goes out and looks for the bodies are trying to bring justice to them.
Yeah. And it's, the guy, he's definitely got a macabre psyche when you read his writings. You are looking into the minds of someone who is definitely, not all there. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, okay. I think we all need to take a quick break.
Yeah. Let's take 5, because these dark rabbit holes are not fun. So,
and we're about to get unfortunately darker. So we will be right back, travelers.
Eerie, Appalachia. Gear up for a frightful jaunt into the darkest reaches of the ancient Appalachians. Folks deep within the Appalachian hollers lean close to the campfire to share stories of the inexplicable with hushed awe. Monsters rumbling in the hills, strange lights darting through the pitch black night sky, horrible occurrences almost ineffable in their bizarre tragedy. Tall tales, you might say. Tell that to the Flatwoods monster in Braxton County, West Virginia, or the Goat Man of Louisville. Look into his humanoid eyes and let him know you don't believe. And what of those apparitions in Mammoth Cave's Corpse Rock, or the Satan spawn known as the Jersey Devil? How do you respond when confronted by these mysteries? From the metaphysical energy that swirls near Serpent Mound in Ohio to Point Pleasant's Mothman legacy, Mark Muncy and Carrie Schultz explore the dark history lurking in the shadows of Appalachia. Read by Mark Muncy, author and experts on strange folklore with appearances on shows such as Ancient Aliens, The Curse of Robert the Doll, and many, many more.
Greetings, mortals and others. I'm Dick Terhune, the voice from hell. I work with haunted attractions all over the US, Canada, and Europe to increase audiences and enhance their experience with highly effective commercials, narrations, animatronic character voices, whatever your dark heart desires. Let me help you do more, scare more, profit more. Find out more at Voice from Hell on Facebook and at voicefromhell.com.
So we're back down the rabbit hole.
I took a shower. I feel much better. So
well, you're gonna need another one. So
what? No.
Yes, because I'm gonna talk about what is it? Norman Bates? No.
What?
Wait, Hannibal Lecter?
No.
Wait. I'm actually gonna talk about the originator of some of the horror stories that we all love as movies, which is Ed Gein.
Oh, Eddie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for those that may not know who Ed Gein is, he was They call him a serial killer, and the definition of serial killer gets very, very interesting. But this is Edward Theodore Gein. He was actually born August 27th, 1906. And he has a couple nicknames, which is the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul.
Yes.
And the reason he is called this is because he ended up doing several crimes, but I'm going to get into how this all started. So there were people in this community. So he was up in Wisconsin. And I say that because I grew, my family's from Wisconsin. I didn't grow up there, but I lived there for a little bit. But there was a time period in this smaller community where people disappeared. And it wasn't like, you see a lot of serial killers who target prostitutes, for instance, because they're sort of fringe. And a lot of times, people aren't missing them right away and stuff like that. And no offense, they get into cars with strange people. So keeping track of that, not that justifies it at all. You should not have violence, but it does make them easier prey for horrible people because of their line of work. The same is true with runaways and people who are homeless and stuff. It's the fringes of society, which it shouldn't be, that need more protection. But up in this very small community, there were some people that disappeared. There was a little bit of a boogeyman type situation until November 16th of 1957. There was a 58-year-old Plainfield hardware store owner named Bernice Warden disappeared. Now, there was a festival in town that day, but what happened was somebody went in to the hardware store, and it was deer hunting season, right?
Yep.
So it didn't see a lot of people, but when people went in that evening around 5 p.m., they found the cash register open. Bernice was gone, and there were blood stains on the floor. Now,
a good sign.
These are never good signs. Frank Warden, who is Bernice's son, told the investigators that were looking, because it's a missing persons at this point, that the evening before their mother's disappearance, and Ed Gein came into the store, and he was supposed to return the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. So the last sale in this store, in this cash register, was for the gallon of antifreeze. So that night, Ed Gein was arrested on suspicion of having something to do with Bernice's disappearance, right?
Right.
What they found when they went to his property literally changed everything. And I'm not saying that there weren't terrible people before this. There was Jack the Ripper, all of this, right? But this was a small community.
All these other famous,
Yeah, very small community. And when they got to the house, they found Bernice decapitated in a shed on Gein's property, hung upside down with her legs on a crossbar and her torso dressed out like a deer. So what that means is he had strung her up, disemboweled, emptied her insides, and was bleeding her out like you would when you hunt a deer.
Yeah. Ugh, terrifying.
It's terrifying, but worse is when they go into his house, they find a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chairs, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls that were made into bowls,
human skin, a corset made from a female's torso, shoulders to waist, leggings made from human skin, masks from the head of females. There was a person named Mary Hogan. They found her face mask in a paper bag, her skull in a box. They found Bernice's head in a burlap sack, her heart, Bernice's heart, in a plastic bag at the front of a stove. They found 9 vulvae, which is part of the female, in a shoebox. A young girl's dress, more vulva, a belt made of human nipples.
Yes. That's the
4
thing.
noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made of humans' faces, and fingernails from human fingers.
He was a busy boy.
He was. Mary Hogan was a tavern homeowner that disappeared December 8th, 1954.
And now, and if I recall, we're not 100% certain how many of these he killed himself. We know a few, but he was also had access to the nearby cemetery, which is why he had gotten the ghoul name.
Exactly. He was actually found to have gone to that cemetery and dug up over 40 bodies.
Yeah.
There are approximately 8 people they think he may have killed, but they don't have evidence of that. He's just suspected of it.
Yeah. So, he was very much a waste not, want not.
No, and he was found to have been eating them. And one of the reasons he was so scary and inspired Psycho was because his mother died.
Yep.
And he kept her upstairs on a bed.
Yep.
Decomposing.
That's where our boy Norman Bates comes from. And then wearing the skin and all that is where Leatherface comes from. And then, of course, Buffalo Bob from
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. And then even further into Hannibal, they did it a couple more times using some Eddie's stuff. And there's other movies, including one called Gein that was about Gein, but they change them all for the screen and for the books. But yeah, it's pretty terrible, all the things they do.
But his case was interesting from the fact that it very much inspired the horror that we see today.
Like, inspired the modern slasher, definitely.
Absolutely. And they think he cannibalized and ate parts of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he admitted to crimes and then said he didn't remember those crimes.
Yeah.
They did find that he had a very below average intelligence and intellect. There were a lot of things that happened, losses on his farm and with his family.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read the accounts from the officers that had to go into that place, because not only it wasn't kept in pristine condition, it was like a hoarder's house.
Yeah.
On top of it.
Yeah. And they most recently a friend of the show, Eric Powell, who creates the Goon comic, which he's a self-taught artist and all that. He did a Kickstarter because he wanted to do a true graphic novel of the Ed Gein story. And I just got it literally, right before we moved. And I had thought I had mispacked it somewhere because I hadn't found it. And then right before we did this episode, I found it. And I haven't even had a chance to really crack the spine yet. But the art in it is amazing. And from his previous work, I can guarantee that it is going to be riveting once I sit down. And that is, did you hear what Eddie Gein done? And it's from the accounts and such. And some from 1957. You can't go wrong. And man, the book is available at Albatross Press Books, albatrossfunnybooks.com. You can order it direct from Eric, and I'm certain it is well worth your money. I have one of the signed editions, thankfully, from the Kickstarter. So
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think if you go down the rabbit hole, there's a couple documentaries and many shows about Gein.
oh yeah,
And you talk about prolific serial killers and stuff. I think with him, the reason it was different, kind of like Cropsey, was people were just disappearing.
yeah. It was just it was a boogeyman. Somebody was something out on the farm was getting them, and I think even at one point they suspected that it was a wild man in the woods, that was nearby. So,
and I think
could be taking these people. So,
well, and I think back, both of these were a time where you didn't want to think that there's a human that's doing this like this. I know with the kids in the Cropsey, they thought they were just wandering off.
Yeah.
They had stories for where some of these people did, and the pursuant of it, the only reason Ed was stopped at all was because the son came forward and said, wait, no, this was the last person who was here. Yeah. Here's the last receipt we had. If there wasn't blood, if there wasn't things like that, also when they found him, he denied anything happening at all.
Yeah, no, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he denied it happening. It was only when they literally found the body on his property that, you can't deny it anymore. That,
that.
Yeah, oh yeah, that. But it's interesting to think that here's somebody who took so many people, he took like 7 people that they believe. He was never convicted, so I'm going to put believe in quotation marks.
Yeah.
But however many people he took them before anybody realized. And this was happening, and they were talking about these people because there was a younger kid, there was another gentleman. This was not like they're only taking nuns from monasteries on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. It's like, so there are real boogeymen out there. You should be careful regardless of where you go, whether you're in town, in nature, in the fields. Like, be aware of your surroundings, make sure people know where you are, make sure people know what you're doing, so that you do not run into these real life boogeymen.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. These are crazy things that we and think about all the mother issues we just discussed. Ed Gein had mother issues, and our boy Rand from Cropsey, he writes Mother's Day letters. That's the only time he writes everybody is Mother's Day's letters, and there's lots and lots of issues. And then of course our favorite fictionalized version of Eddie, my favorite is I know there are people who love Texas Chainsaw. I love my Leatherface, but I go Psycho, and that's because I worked on Psycho 4 as an intern sound kid and got to work with the great Norman Bates.
I go Buffalo Bill, Hannibal Lecter, because that Silence of the Lambs, I mean, that I think was, you look at the psychology of it, and they like to blame mothers and all this other stuff, but there's definitely a whole nurture versus nature conversation that you can have. And was it because of how they were raised, or were they already killers when they came out of the womb?
Yeah, and that's we get that is, I mean, it's so crazy how that works, right? So
yeah, I will say this. I think there's definitely an interesting thing when you go down the rabbit hole, which we will cover, because I am going to talk about some of the other killers. Zodiac's going to be up on the list, which will probably be in November once we get past through spooky season. But I think it's interesting because I think once you are successful at killing somebody, these people who are predisposed to go in that direction, this is my belief, I have no training or anything like that, just having watched and read a tremendous amount of true crime, but I think kind of like anything, when you get away with doing it, it on some even subconscious level, it acknowledges that you had that win, that experience, and that you were able to be successful at it. So some part of you goes, okay, you were successful at it, you could do it again. And the moment you do it again and are successful at it, regardless of whether you think it's evil or know it's wrong or any of these things, you know, the fact that you're not put in a danger yourself from trying to do it, it heightens it, I think. And I think it makes it easier for them to continue. But yes, so our two boogeymen, Mark, Cropsey and Gein.
They're Rand and Gein are definitely, crazy, and they both are, got kind of what they deserve at some point, whether you believe them innocent or not. We'd love to hear your opinion on that. So please, drop us a line at eerietravels.com and let us know who's your boogeyman. Did your town have a boogeyman turned out to be real? One of my favorites, the town that dreaded sundown. We haven't even talked about that, or some of these other ones that are coming up. So we'll talk more. So
much more to keep our listeners either terrified or entertained, one of the two.
Yep. And so travelers, as always, thanks for joining us on this scary tale.
One thing, we do have a travel though.
We do. That's right. I completely forgot.
The Crime Museum, where you can go see. Mark?
Yes. Yeah, over in Pigeon Forge. We've mentioned it before. Go to Alcatraz East, and it was the Washington, D.C. Crime Museum. And now that collection, it's the Adam Walsh collection. So we'll have to talk about that at some point too. But that is where they have tons and tons of true crime collectibles, if you will. They've got, the Bronco from OJ. They've got Ted Bundy's car. They've got the bloody boards from the cabin where Billy the Kid was killed. And so much more. Gacy paintings, stuff like that. The typewriters that so many of them have used. And they have an Ed Gein thing that I think you should see. So I'm going to leave that as a special. So when you go visit, you'll see it. So, but
Yes.
You can also go visit Willowbrook. They do have tours for the grounds. I recommend going with the tour group rather than trying to go explore on your own. We also recommend highly that you help out with the Friends of Jennifer, and we will put links to all that in the notes. And you can even help volunteer search the Willowbrook estate for the missing kids. So
Absolutely. So, well, I don't know how else to end this with our travelers, my friend.
Well, I just would like to remind everybody that a boy's best friend is his mother. And, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, travelers, and all of our wonderful, as Dick Terhune says, greetings, mortals and others, we will see you on the other side.